Welcome to the Mad in America podcast, your source for science, psychiatry, and social justice.
Hello, my name is Bob Whitaker, and today I have the pleasure of speaking with Kermit Cole. We'll be speaking about a philosophical enterprise that Kermit is now deeply engaged in, and that is, broadly speaking, how humor can help in creating a shared experience that is helpful to the healing process. Kermit, in his experiences of being with people in psychotic states, has seen humor as a moment that a connection can be made. In many ways, this project is bringing Kermit back full circle to his work as a film director early in his professional career. After dropping out of Oberlin College, he joined a mime troupe that toured the U.S. as well as Italy and Greece, inspired by his interest in humor as well as how connection arises in the spaces between words. One of his first films was a short titled Before Comedy, which is a film performed entirely without words. Another, which he directed in 1994, was titled Living Proof, HIV and the Pursuit of Happiness. Now, I met Kermit shortly after I published Mad in America, my book, in 2002. He was working at that time as a residence director of what might be called a halfway house in Cambridge, called Wellmet, for people who had been discharged from or who were avoiding stays in psychiatric hospitals. The house was modeled to a degree after the Soteria Project. Then in 2012, after I published Anatomy of an Epidemic, Kermit, Louisa Putnam, and I transformed my personal blog site, Mad in America, into a web magazine. Kermit was the founding editor of the site, and for the first few years was something of a one-man band, posting science reviews, blogs, and personal stories at a feverish pace. After retiring from that position, he trained in open dialogue therapy, and Louisa and Kermit practiced dialogically inspired therapy with clients in New Mexico. Both Louisa and Kermit are Mad in America board members. Kermit, welcome to MI Radio.
Hi, good to be here.
It's nice to have you here. Listen, I think the way to start is really to go back to your time as a mime, to sort of understand that trajectory, this path you've been on. So tell us why you were interested in mime and a little bit about your experiences touring in the U.S., Italy, and Greece, and what was the purpose of your troupe?
One starting point is around that time when I was in a conversation with people about faith and religion and what we believe in. I remember saying the words, I believe in comedy, but I didn't know what I meant at the time. It was a very deeply felt statement. And in some ways, this has been a thread through my life, trying to understand what I meant by that and what the implications of it were. Because it was, I didn't just mean I wanted to laugh. I felt like there was something I was seeing something in comedy, and the fact that I had seen laughter arise, in my family at some of the hardest, times that we went through. And it just seemed like it was always there, among the people who were really dealing with something at a very fundamental level. And mime drew me because I knew that I knew I wanted to make films, and I knew the thing about films that interested me were not just the words, but the silent moment in between the words. And I felt like I had a lot to learn about that and learn how to tell stories through mime that were very much like the kind of stories I knew I wanted to tell in film. In some ways, mime is an extremely efficient way to tell film-like stories. So I signed up and just started doing it, and that led to actually being a member of the troupe and traveling Italy and Greece and on the streets and on stages and learning.
So would you do it when you're doing street theater? Would it be sort of a planned performance, or would it be just extemporaneous and you would sort of respond to the moment and see how things went?
Well, actually, we started out doing stage. That's what we were interested in. We booked a tour of Italy doing stage work. And then one day we were walking through a piazza, and I said, I think if we froze, we'd get a crowd. And we did. And within a few seconds, there were some, as it happens, Japanese tourists taking our pictures. And then there was a crowd. But the crowd didn't know how to interact with us. They didn't know what we were doing. So they were right up in our faces. There was no line between us. I saw a little girl's eyes looking at me and her mouth sort of agape. And I just locked onto her eyes and imitated her face. And she instantly just was transported into this look of wonder. And we just went from there.
There's your moment of connection you're talking about.
Exactly that, yeah. So that we from there just spontaneously did, and then eventually built a whole street routine that started out that way with this kind of unexpected connections. In one of our pieces, I was a janitor who was picking up and moving around mannequins, and that was everybody else, and knocking them over and using their one mannequin's feet to catch the other one and stuff like that. And well, what I noticed as we were doing the stage, the performances, is that these pieces that would work really well on stage didn't quite work on the street until I made sure that I had an audience. And I'm defining audience as a bunch of strangers who are aware of each other and are reacting together, that they're reacting to each other.
So the audience has a shared response in a way.
Yeah. And as soon as I got that level of connection, then I knew the things that would work on stage would work on the street also. So it was about creating this sort of, I'm going to call a sacred space in which people are aware of each other and interacting. And because from there we went to Greece, and I couldn't help but think, in Greece, citizens were required to go to the theater. And I think that was why. It was to be in that sort of shared experience where you're witnessing something together and being transformed, and watching actors transform into people and take the perspective of another person, which is the fundamental act of being a citizen, if not actually of being human. Is like, being able to suddenly see that the world looks different through someone else's eyes.
It's what you're talking about through mime and then your films. It's about creating a shared experience, an environment, whether it be mime or whether it be through film. And so you come back and you do before comedy. Just describe real briefly the setup.
Oh, it's essentially it's a world. It says at the beginning of the film, it says millions of years ago, and then you see these figures, people in what amounts to furry clown outfits. Clown outfits stitched together out of ancient world furs, with big furry shoes, and they're lost. They seem to not know where they're going or what their purpose is, and then they run into a bunch of cavemen who are bored, evidently bored. But the first reaction they have when they see these new people show up is to be afraid of them. These are the only two options they live with, and then neither one of them know what to do with each other, so the clowns just end up walking away. And then they, stumble on these what we called pie fruits, which were filled with whipped cream, and they suddenly realize what their purpose is. And I think the reason it stands up to repeated viewing is because the first time through, you're on the journey, you're seeing things for the first time. And the key moment is that you see the light dawn in the clown's face. You see that something's going to happen. He doesn't know what it is yet. So you're just a step ahead. And so you're watching that happen. You're watching him realize who he is, that he's born to put a pie in someone's face. And I think the reason it stands up to another viewing is because it's that fact where you realize I'm seeing through another set of eyes, that it's not just the surprise of it. It's kind of delicious to realize I'm actually seeing somebody for the first time, that they're seeing something.
Before this, they're sort of afraid of each other. They're scared of each other. They're threatening each other. But this becomes that moment of humor where they see a kinship, so to speak. Now they can be with each other.
Ultimately, or eventually, I learned, or I thought, people who have been traumatized really can't differentiate between being surprised, something new, something unexpected, and being afraid. Like anything new, anything unexpected, anything out of the ordinary is just encountered as something potentially dangerous. And what the clowns are introducing is that there's an alternative. There's that you can be that surprise can lead to wonder.
So I think that's a really great description as we try to connect the dots of this journey. Let's take a quick stop now with your AIDS movie, Living Proof. What was the voyage of discovery when you made that film?
After the clown film, I was looking for the next thing to do. And actually, it happens it was one of the clowns who's in the film, a good friend of mine, told me about this photography project that had been started by someone with AIDS, They were setting out to create positive images of people living with AIDS, which itself at the time was a startlingly unexpected thing to do. At that time, there simply was no such thing. The only image anybody had of somebody with AIDS was somebody basically about to die. And the whole conversation on the topic was so filled with judgment and terror. And it was so surprising to me that I thought, I have to make a documentary of this. And it also drew me on a lot of levels. A lot of the stories that I ended up telling were about people who were, maybe on the surface disenfranchised or unappreciated, who then find the thing that makes them different is the thing they have to offer. And in the course of making the film, it's just, one of the central stories that came out of it was the people involved in that project some of them were straight, and then they said, when I got my diagnosis, there was nowhere for me to turn to than the gay community. I didn't start out there, but I came to really appreciate and respect these people who had, gave me what I needed when I needed it, and I had nowhere else to get it. And to me, that was just a story I wanted to be part of bringing to.
What you talk about when we're talking about people who are straight finding community with the gay community is how important community is. Because of people traumatized and all, and people often who've been psychiatrized and all, they feel very isolated. And one of the things that I think, even at Mad in America, we often talk about community, but it's feeling not just isolated all the time. And it sounds like that was one of your motifs that you see in your movie.
I'll just throw in here that's what I eventually, when I started doing the research on trying to figure out, how it was that humor was so powerfully involved in so many important points along the way. It turns out there is research on laughter that shows that the arising of laughter isn't as strongly correlated with something funny happening as it is with strong moments of social connection. And there's also other research that where laughter is a signal to someone to come play, and that the play is safe, and that we can interact, we can practice connecting, we can practice the many things we need to practice together to make a full life. Being able, which includes sometimes fighting, sparring, whatever it might be, but the laughter says we are safe together, and we can play.
You leave filmmaking, and you did refer to it already about you wanted to dive deeper. So tell us what you did. You went to school, and how'd you become a residence director at Wilmette, and what did you learn at Wilmette?
Well, I was still doing film. I got involved with this sort of grassroots peer counseling thing called co-counseling, or also known as reevaluation counseling. But I found that in doing it, when I really got deep with someone, basically I was getting from that moment everything that I had been hoping to get from working with actors or doing anything with a camera. And it felt better because I didn't feel like I was recording it and then selling it to Rupert Murdoch. Actually, when I realized that the AIDS film was almost done, but that the man who had started the project I was documenting wouldn't survive to see the opening of the film, I just couldn't deal with it. It just broke my heart. When I realized that the film was done and it was good, but that he wouldn't see it in the theater, I just burst into tears. And that feeling, is it okay that I have taken his inspiration this way, really haunted me. I just realized I have to go be a therapist, and I wanted to go deeper with people with in these kinds of crises, and I didn't want there to be a camera there. I got lucky in the end, and I ended up getting an undergraduate and a master's from Harvard, which was just sheer luck. While I was there, I got involved in research. I was doing, working in supporting research on mood disorders and schizophrenia, and I was really excited about that. But what I was noticing was that people would get divvied up into research on either mood disorders or schizophrenia or trauma sometimes on really arbitrary criteria that made no sense. But when I would suggest that there were connections between these things, between mood disorders and schizophrenia and trauma, maybe that's what we should be looking at. The best response I could hope for was being laughed at. Usually the response was more like, yeah, good luck to you if you think you're going to have a career with that kind of idea. And I mean, it was just a non-starter. And but it bugged me. But what I also learned working on the research was that I really liked the people, and I felt a real connection and affinity to the people who came in with schizophrenia diagnoses, which I wasn't expecting. But I just realized there's something here I need to spend time with. And that led to ultimately getting a job running a group home, because I was beginning to get really soured on what I was learning. The building I was working in at Harvard was the William James building, the tallest. It's the tallest building in Cambridge, a literal ivory tower. And I was in there saying, "Oh my God, William James would be horrified by the things that are being done in his name." And I got this job at the time running this group home, and I said, "This is what I want to do." I mean, I took the job saying, with the question in my mind was, what happens if you really devote yourself to making sure people feel safe?
You lived there. So in this way, it was a lot like Soteria. You lived there. You guys ate and cooked together. And
Yeah, it was actually started initially in 1960, long before Soteria, by a disgruntled Harvard professor who hadn't gotten tenure. And he just said, he's very radical. He just said to his students, "Okay, this is no longer a class in sociology," I think it was. He said, we're going to cure schizophrenia." And they went, the group of them went and stayed on a hospital floor, in a psych hospital for spring break, and came out with the idea for WOMET, which was just the students living in the house with people in crisis and just living life. This was actually well before, Artie Lang's house or Kingsley Hall. And so it was me and four more part-time staff living there. I had actually people come in and do like improv workshops, theater games. I found that was really helpful. But the bottom line is I found that people would often want to come volunteer in the house. And I would try to make that work. And I realized it doesn't work. If you're not living here, then you're just a visitor and you're suspect. I mean, you have to be sort of sleeping under the same roof and breathing the same air, preparing the same food. And the thing that I was most happy about for the years I was there was I don't think there was a night that we didn't laugh at dinner.
that's what I was going to ask you. So you would laugh together.
Yeah, I did hire a comedian at one point. A guy showed up wanting to work and live in the house, work in the house, and he also was an aspiring comedian. And I thought, fantastic, he can handle all the heckling. But he was even better than that, and he, last I knew, was running a similar house. He went on to a career.
I would just say real briefly, when I visited like Soteria houses in Israel or the medication-free ward in Norway, they were vibrant places. In other words, there was a lot going on, a lot of humor. Now, for me, one of the discoveries is we have this image of people with severe diagnosis of severe disorder, schizophrenia, as being sort of dour, non-communicative. And I'm sure that does happen, but there's also times when there's a flourishing of communication and being with each other that can be quite fun, I guess is the way I would put it. I don't know if you would agree with that.
I think people end up with a diagnosis when they're not behaving or speaking or interacting in ways that we understand or that we hope for, we expect, or that are comfortable. And then that, gets magically declared a disease. And that can happen, when any one of us has the flu. We're acting and speaking and interacting in ways that, but people that we wouldn't ideally otherwise, and people understand, oh, that's because you have the flu right now. But if you can't see the reasons that somebody's behaving that way, then eventually, after you've run through the possibilities of, what you're left with is, oh, it must be a psychiatric illness. The same can be true if somebody is on a drug. They're drugged. They're not feeling. They're feeling however they feel, and they're not able or willing or to in those circumstances interact in the way that you might like. But I think the really essential thing in all of this work is to maintain the faith, the awareness that the person you're hoping for is in fact in there. And if you haven't contacted them yet, that's on you. You got to wait. You got to hang in there. And that's been my experience. It's like, even with people, I've been with people who have in fact been cast aside, and they're given diagnoses that from which they were not expected to recover. And I did hang in with them, and eventually what they were saying was making sense. It just didn't happen to me. They'd given up on saying it in a way that was easy to discern because it hadn't worked before. Nobody had heard it before.
So that's well put. So let's jump ahead. You stop being a residence director. You get Mad in America off the ground. You serve as the editor for a number of years. And then when you stop doing that, you become trained in open dialogue therapy. Since this is a bit about humor too, where did you see humor involved in that dialogical space?
Well, the most significant one, I guess, was when I finally did actually get to Finland and go to the hospital where open dialogue was originated, and for the first time watched a session in the hospital, which the situation must have arisen from something pretty dire because it was in a locked section. So the fact that we were in a hospital meant something pretty serious must have happened. And we were there with the young woman and the family. I don't know what they were talking about. It was in Finnish. So the only thing I could do was sort of track the interactions, going back to the little interactions between the words. And I would see, at first I saw her eyes dart up, and a little smile. And she would say something, and this wave of laughter would circle the room. I mean, everybody in the room was pretty downtrodden. They were staring at the floor, long gaps in the conversation. They seemed shell-shocked. But she would say something, and everybody's eyes would lift up, and this wave of laughter would circle the room. It felt to me like a flock of birds taking off. And and I left the room thinking, this is not incidental. This is not just a quick relief of tension. This is something really elemental is happening here. And if I thought of it as tectonic plates shifting, I thought of it as groundwater being tapped. I thought of it as new meaning arising. And by new meaning, I mean some shared understanding that was beginning to, make of a new path forward possible. And so I walked out thinking, I've got to figure out what this is. So I really that started me on like reading the research and thinking about it. And then along the way thinking about all that, I realized I started, when I was working with people individually, when we would laugh, or when a person would laugh, we'd share the laugh, we'd enjoy it, we'd enjoy the feeling of freedom that the laughter gives, freedom from whatever, freedom from the pain, freedom from the old, whatever it was we were making a joke about. And I think there's an inhibition against going back to that moment, because it's like, well, we just felt free of it. We don't want to go back right away. But what I learned to do is to say, okay, well, before we go on, 1 second, what was under that laugh? What do you think that was? What came before that? And make some space for that. And a lot of times I would describe what the person would eventually find, or what we would find, as a double bind. I mean, a double bind is, having two contradictory directives, or two contradictory needs, or things that, on the one hand, I feel like I have to do this, and on the other hand, I feel like I have to do that. My mother wanted this, my father wanted that. I don't know how to resolve those two things into one clear action. There is no way to do it. And of course, there's a lot of theories about schizophrenia that's where it comes from.
So there's a sense that this moment of humor becomes an opportunity for eventual self-understanding, as you sort of, dig into what was the source of the humor and all, to sort of become aware of oneself and these conflicts that maybe they didn't have before that moment of humor.
Yeah, I mean, I think it starts with an awareness, and then that actually led to me thinking about humor itself. When back to when I said I believe in comedy, I had at times in my childhood thought I want to be a comedian, but I didn't know what that really meant. I, there was something in that statement that I wanted, and so I did spend a lot of my early adult life trying to be funny in a certain kind of way that was based on looking for funny, looking for witty, looking for smart aleck things to say. When we would pay attention to it and make the space, and the person would become aware of the feeling that that laugh had arisen from, then we would find under that the really explicable contradictions in their life they had been unable to even see, much less express. And so there I started thinking, what if instead of trying to find something funny to say or be clever, or be witty, I just try to sink into the feeling that's arising. There's something funny here. What is, and just let myself like kind of just tune out, like if you're trying to remember something and you realize, oh, I can't do it. I have to like stop trying to remember it, and then I know it'll come if I just stop trying. It's like that with a joke. If I stop trying to find the joke and just trust that it's down in there and just focus on the feeling, then it would happen. Like a few seconds, a few minutes later, as soon as I stopped thinking about it, my brain would say, oh, here it is. Here's the contradiction. Here's the shift of perspective. Here's the seemingly irreconcilable perspectives that are both necessary and both valid. And then I would find some way to say that. But it wasn't because I was being clever with words. It was because I was trying to figure out how to describe something, that was worth seeing.
Tell us about your current work and engagement with the philosophy of humor and your thoughts about how, I don't know, it could be incorporated into training, where you're going with this whole project.
Right at the end of his life, Einstein was referring to humor as a part of the human equation, and he was actively inviting comedians to talk to him about it. He said he was trying to solve the human equation. He said, I've solved the physical equation. Now I'm trying to solve the human equation. And he felt that humor was a key to it. And unfortunately, he died before we got any output on that search. And that, plus some other things, the fact that he was engaged in a decades-long debate on the nature of time with the only major philosopher who wrote a book entirely dedicated to humor, Henri Bergson, who was also an accomplished mathematician and understood physics as it was. All these things interested me when I thought, so what would they say? If I could have gotten Bergson and Einstein to talk about this, what might they say? And that just led me down this path of really studying things related to that, quantum theory. Einstein referred to one of the key components of it, entanglement, where there can in fact be a connection in real time, or simultaneously, instantly, from one part of the universe to another, irrespective of the speed of light. Einstein referred to that as spooky action at a distance. I've sort of reframed it as what I call kooky action at a distance. Is that what a joke does is it puts a little marker and says, okay, you're here. This is your perspective. This is what you see. And then a executed joke just instantly lifts you out of that moment, out of that place, and that place in space and time, and drops you into another one. Could be anywhere. Could be in 1,000 years ago. Suddenly, or whatever it is, suddenly you're seeing the world through another perspective. What a joke does is it gives you one example, two examples, and then your brain starts chewing on those and saying, "Oh, I know what this story is. I know what the third thing is going to be." Based on that, I can predict the third thing based on these two examples. And what the joke does is it suddenly says, no, you're wrong. You don't know the whole story. You don't have the only perspective on this. And then really excellent, really elegant humor that I appreciate, it walks you through these feelings of disorientation, surprise, fear, indignation, anger that can come when you realize you don't have all that you don't own the whole truth, that there are other perspectives that truth is comprised of. And it walks you to that other perspective that you didn't know about. And it leaves you there saying, oh, this is good. I mean, this is better than if I was alone, because this means I am connected. I'm in a relationship with others who can watch my back.
So, you're digging into this philosophy of humor, this understanding of humor, this exploration of humor. Tell us about how you see it being applicable to the world that we exist in and that are sort of focused on here at Mad in America, this world of, people suffering from psychiatric difficulties, emotional difficulties, trauma, and that sort of thing. How do we take, your journey, what you've learned, and I guess incorporate it into our thinking about how we help each other?
For starters, I'll say, because this trail of thought started with open dialogue, one of the things that I was thinking about that was I really wanted to do anything I could to bring more open dialogue to the world and get people interested in it, because I've experienced it as being a very, transformative and beautiful way to relate to the world, and also very, very useful in helping people in a crisis. And I wanted more people to be interested. And I thought, if the only thing people know about open dialogue is that it deals with these problems that I personally, that any given person might not want to ever deal with if they could avoid it, it's kind of hard to get them interested. But if what I'm saying is there's something beautiful here, we laugh, we take situations that are really hard and frightening and sometimes genuinely tragic, and we laugh together. And that arises naturally out of this philosophy. And that was the joy of it. We'd have these crisis situations and we'd end up laughing together. And I thought, if people only knew, same as with the house I ran. We would often say, if people only knew how much fun we're having, they wouldn't be afraid of us. So that's one. Another is also just it's about having a particular relationship to the world. But I think of it really more as an openness to connection, an openness to the fact that there might be perspectives that you haven't considered yet, which is a really useful thing to do when you're feeling doomed or tragic. Say, oh, I don't know everything. There is a perspective I don't have yet. Can I remain open to it? And to do it, to realize, if I can find that place in myself that becomes alive when I laugh at a joke, then when I touch it, I will remember there's a way to see this that I haven't seen yet. And it would help if I could find somebody else with whom I could laugh about it, because then I'll remember that the story's not over and that there's stories I don't even know about yet to come. And they're worth waiting for.
So, Kermit, thank you for your time. As I've been listening, I've been thinking about how much I enjoy laughing and how much I enjoy when I'm in a situation where I'm laughing with others. It's a conversation that actually makes you feel good about being with others, and including being with others who are different from you, or struggling, or because those who you might see as different from you, what you discover through the humor is your commonality so often as well. This shared experience, the shared sense of being able to laugh and that sort of thing. So,
yeah, and like I was saying, it's not just incidental. My theory here is that this is an essential and integral part of the human experience. And I think we can be afraid of it because, yes, like any tool that's powerful or sharp, it can hurt. It can cause damage. We can hurt ourselves and others. But I think if we spend time with it, thinking about it in this way, we can realize, like any tool, we can learn how to use it and make beautiful things, help each other really get the most out of the opportunities that come with being human.
thanks. That's a great way to end. Now, Kermit, I know you've done presentations. Maybe you can give us a link so people can at least see your slides. That might be of interest, I think, or any of your writings.
I am putting together an event at the National Comedy Center in Jamestown that we're planning for October 9 through 12 of this year, 25, which will be all about spending a few days there together, talking about some of these theories. We'll make CEUs available for therapists, and actually, we're going to be offering webinars prior to that, as soon as we get it together, hopefully in the next couple of months, to talk about these things. But create this weekend at the National Comedy Center where we can explore the accomplishments of the best comedians, not to become comedians and not only to appreciate their art, which we do, but to learn from that, to draw from that any insights that we can gain into how to use their ways of being, their ways of creating comedy that these that the best comedians have worked out over decades, and incorporate them into our lives and perhaps into our work as therapists.
Sounds like a great event, actually. A really unique event as well. So, Kermit, thanks so much for spending this time with us. It was really a nice conversation.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you for listening to the Mad in America podcast. For more news, views, and updates, visit madinamerica.com.